And hello, everyone, and welcome back to Preterist Apologetics. I am Don Preston, and over there is Mike Sullivan. We're sorry to be one night late. Mike had a little bit of a delay. I had a little bit of a delay last night, so we had to postpone it. And we're glad to be back with you. I think we got some great stuff to share with you tonight. And of course, I was in Montana last week, and boy, I tell you, that was a fun time, Mike. Some wonderful fellowship up there, and I met just tons of people that I've never met before. And the really cool thing about it is that 90%, 95% of them watch my morning musings on a regular basis. So that was just really cool.
Don, who doesn't watch your morning musings? That's a question.
Well, I wish. But yeah, it was a wonderful time. It really was. Got to reconnect with some guys. I got to spend a little bit more time with Terry Swift. I'd met him at Jonesboro last year. Terry's a very sharp guy, very well read. And he's been taking on the IO folks like crazy and just decimating them. Of course, they don't pay any attention, but nonetheless, he's been doing a great job. So it was good to be able to visit with him a little bit more than I did back in Jonesboro in Arkansas. And just overall, it was a very pleasant experience.
Yeah, I've heard some good reviews, and of course, it's a little bit controversial. So it's got other people up in arms. So but it's like it's like you said, you're there. You don't have to agree with everybody. I know Rick didn't agree with everybody. And it's just a good time to study and.
It is. And I told them when they invited me, I said, you do understand that I'm not a proponent of covenant creation. And they said, yeah, it doesn't matter. We want you to come and we want you to present. And I said, good enough for me. I said, I'm willing to learn. My mind is open, and I want some things clarified. I did have a few things clarified, but other things opened up that made me go, not quite so sure about that. So I'm still working on it,
Yeah, well, I am too. I remain open on Genesis issues, but if I was to classify myself right now, I would be old earth, local flood. That's just kind of where I've been for a while.
Oh, well, you're just a heretic. That's all there is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the edge. I mean,
yeah.
But
well, look, I had some people. I did a review of the conference, posted it on YouTube, and I had people saying, "You had no business going up there with those heretics. That proves that you're a heretic. You're a false." They never made one argument. It was just, those are false teachers. You're a false teacher. You're to be condemned for even going up there. And I said, well, present an argument. Show me why they're heretics. Show me why I'm wrong. Right. And so they wouldn't even try, Mike, which you and I get used to that real commonly, when people just simply, they like to lob rockets at us and they don't make any biblical exegetical argument. It's just like, you're a false teacher, so I'm going to move on.
Yeah. And you made a point that, in the past, you thought that they were teaching something that they weren't. Now, there are other preterists that do believe, and they're futurists. I can go to a website right now where there is a futurist that is teaching that Genesis 1-3 is an allegory of Israel coming out of the Exodus.
Right.
Okay. And written during the Babylonian period. And there are some preterists that take that position. Now, Tim and Jeff's position is different. It's that that was the covenant that was created there. It's not necessarily, Israel coming out of Egypt and a poetic story about that event. So it is different, but hey, futurists fight over Genesis all the time. Preterists can fight over Genesis as
Absolutely.
Well.
We're not distinctive in that regard. No. So, but people like to pick on us, because we're the new kid on the block, so to speak. But be that as it may be, like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I did get some things, some answers to some things, and really enjoyed that. It was great to meet Steve Magwa. Have you ever met him?
Yeah, he went to the Berean conference. He's just a really nice guy.
Yeah, super nice guy. I tell you one thing, I was just absolutely blown away. I didn't know that Tim Martin had 9 kids, and I didn't know that Steve had 8. I mean, they
That's a
they both.
party right there, man.
That's a party. They both brought their own tribes, and and both families, both kids, all the kids are just smart. I'm
Mm,
telling you, they are smart. They're talented. Steve's family was all over the electronics. I mean,
mm.
every one of them were involved in it. And one of them took my laptop and worked on my PowerPoint presentation and made it easier to read from the
Oh,
audience. You
wow.
know, I go, well, that's cool.
But you
So,
know you're nervous. You know you're nervous because you love your PowerPoint and you're like, please
oh
don't
yeah,
mess
yeah,
with
don't
me.
don't mess too
Please
much
don't.
with it. That's right. Oh, but she did a marvelous job on it, didn't you know, when she told me, if you'll let me take your laptop, if you'll let me take your PowerPoints, I'll improve it. I go, what do you mean improve? She says, oh, I'm not going to bother the content. I'm just going to do the formatting and make it look better. And I said, well, as long as you don't bother the content. Oh, no, no, no. And she didn't, you know,
Right.
everything was right where I had put it. It's just more presentable.
Nice.
And I thought, yeah, that's pretty cool. So I do good to put PowerPoints together as it is. You know, I'm not proficient in it. You know, I look at what Robert Cruikshank does in some of his PowerPoints, and they're just gorgeous.
Yeah.
You know, and I go, I am so jealous. Just, I thought about sending him an email one day and say, okay, dude, you're going to give me a tutorial on how to put together these, you know, these PowerPoint slides to make it as pretty as you do. Because I mean, wow, I see some of his stuff and other people as well that are equally talented. So I appreciate that talent very much. So anyway,
Amen. So we have been in a study. The title of the study is In the Land or In Adam versus in Christ. And so we've been looking at the Abrahamic covenant, the three main constituent elements. And then from there, there's other subheadings under that. But the nation, the land, and the seed. And we're still on the nation. And we started in Deuteronomy 32, 20, and 21. We noticed that there was going to be a new covenant nation, the church, which is actually prophesied in the Old Testament by Moses, contrary to dispensationalism. And Moses is saying, when the appointed time comes in the last days, perverse generation, I'm gonna raise up a nation that's gonna provoke Israel, old covenant Israel, to jealousy. And so that is the nation that Jesus then talks about in Matthew 21. I'm going to take the kingdom from you, old covenant Israel, and I'm going to give it to another nation bearing the fruits thereof. Peter says the church is an elect holy nation. And then, of course, Paul quotes Deuteronomy 32 and he quotes Isaiah 65:1, talking about this new covenant nation. And so that's where we've been. We've been in Romans 9 through 11, and we're kind of going through some of the Old Testament passages because in hermeneutics, whenever a New Testament author, talks about an Old Testament passage, you have to go back there. You have to look at the context. You got to look at the parallels. You got to look at the themes. What is the New Testament author trying to convey about this Old Testament passage? And it's a part of hermeneutics, Don, that just no one really does anymore because they're too busy preparing 3 points in a poem. But let me recommend Don's book here. Elijah Has Come, a solution to Romans 11:25 through 27. Don actually takes the time to go through these Old Testament texts. And Don also he had 2 debates with Dr. Michael Brown, where in the first one was mediated by James White, where Don and Michael kind of debated these Old Testament passages and Romans 11. And then the second debate, moderated by William Bell, they focused in on the times of the Gentiles. Since Michael Brown messed that up so much, Don said, well, we need to have a whole debate on that. And we're going to get into some Greek and we're going to take care of that. And so I encourage you to watch both of those debates and get Don's book, because Romans 9 through 11 is it's so important to understand, especially in light of the Zionist issue.
you know, as coincidence would have it, Mike, I'm writing an article on replacement theology, and the aspersions that are cast at anyone that's not a dispensationalist, basically, but especially those of us who are preterists. And, I took some of your advice that you gave me recently, because you said that when you're writing an article, you'll get it to a certain point, then you'll submit it to Grok or Chat GTP or whatever, and say, okay, make suggestions, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I had this article, and it was about 27 pages long, real short thing, and
Grok made it 100.
I'm working on it now. But nonetheless, I knew I wasn't really finished with it, but I wanted to kind of get a rough form. And so I thought, okay, Mike said it's a great idea to submit it to either Grok or Chat GTP and have it make further suggestions, how to make it more succinct, how to tighten it up, this, that, and the other. So I did. And it was very, very encouraging, I must say. It the analysis of it said on a scale of 1 to 10, as far as persuasiveness, your article is a 7 out of a 10. And then it gave some stylistic suggestions, and so one of the suggestions that it made was to interact more with the dispensational argument about a future restoration of Israel, Romans 11. Well, I hadn't put that in there yet. I was working on it, had some thoughts rolling around in my head. So I thought, okay. And so when you start looking at Romans 11, Mike, and I don't have to tell you this, but this became so glaringly evident in my debate with Michael Brown, which, by the way, the last time I looked, those two debates had been viewed almost 75,000 times.
Nice.
That's amazing. That's some really good exposure for the truth. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you this, there are a lot of brand new preterists as a result of those debates. I've had people contact me and said, I followed Michael Brown for years. You blew him completely, totally out of the way or out of the water. He didn't know how to respond. So I've been studying and I'm now a full preterist. So, very encouraging.
I'm also wondering, because Joel Webbin, Andrew Isker, these other partial preterists are really taking a preterist view of Romans 11 now. Of course, they're claiming they're getting it all from Jordan. Of course, Jordan got it from us, but
right.
So I think your debate with Brown has just kind of made an explosion, because Reformed theology, whether you're all mill or post mill, has a really hard time dealing with Romans 11, and the preterist view just really nails it. Now, the problem with Joel Webbin and Andrew Isker and Jordan is that Romans 11 is inseparably linked to the resurrection, the life from the dead of verse 15, which goes all the way back to Paul's development of life and death in Romans chapter 6.
Absolutely.
And then you're looking forward to that resurrection, that likeness, in the likeness of his death, and then in the likeness of his resurrection and newness of life. But there's an already and there's a not yet.
Yep.
And then we don't get to that not yet until Romans 8, which is the glory that is about to be revealed in the church, and that they're eagerly waiting for the redemption of the body. Yeah. So we have the corporate resurrection right there that's imminent, that's about to take place. And then we get into Romans 11 and then Romans 13, 11, and 12. And all these passages are connected. And so for the partial preterists to kind of try and refute Zionism with a preterist hermeneutic of Romans 11, they don't connect the dots, the rest of the dots on the resurrection, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Some scholars have seen the train coming on Romans 11, 15, for instance. W.D. Davies, in his book, The Gospel and the Land, fantastic work. But he cites Romans 11, 15. If the casting away of Israel results in the riches for the world, and that word world, cosmos, there goes right straight back to Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. In you and your seed shall all nations of the world be blessed. And all you got to do is just connect those dots. Abraham would inherit the world, cosmos. So here is Paul developing that idea of the blessings of the world in Romans 11, verse 15, if the casting away of Israel be the riches of the world that Abraham would inherit, cosmo, then what shall their, that is Israel's, acceptance be except life from the dead? You've already alluded to this text. Well, W.D. Davies in that book, Israel and the Land, said, we dare not mitigate the force of the language here. Paul is talking about Israel's resurrection. Yeah. and you see these commentators like W.D. Davies, and I love most of his stuff, really good stuff. And they lead you, as we've said so many times, they lead you right up to the brink of full preterism.
Mm-hmm.
And then they back off. Tom Holland does it in his commentary on Romans chapter 8. You know, this is Israel's corporate resurrection. This is Paul's concept of resurrection. Now, that doesn't mean that we're denying a future physical resurrection.
Right. He takes the corporate body view everywhere in Corinthians.
Everywhere.
1 Corinthians 15.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's absolutely amazing. But as you and I both know, you know, there are more and more scholars that are willing to take another little tiny step toward us, another little tiny step. And another guy will build on that, take another little half step toward us. It's not going to be all that terribly long until some major scholar steps up and said, guess what I've discovered? And those of us who are preterists are going to sit back and go, that's pretty cool. Where did you get that?
That kind of sounds familiar.
Yeah. So yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And I was in order to do this article and to keep it somewhere less than 100 pages, I was just going down through some of the constituent elements of Romans 9 through 11 that force us, if we're going to be honest students of the word, that force us to see, number one, the imminence of the coming parousia, judgment, and salvation. Number two, indeed the judgment. Because here's Paul, and he wants to talk about the salvation of the remnant. So what does he do? And this is interesting to me, Mike. He quotes from Isaiah chapter 10, verse 22, except the Lord of Sabaoth had left us a remnant, we would be like Sodom, we would be like Gomorrah. Well, what's the context? Okay, there you go. Well, that's not Roman. That's not, there you go. Okay. I'll just read your thoughts on it because I know you and I agree on this. Paul revisits the Old Testament theme that only a remnant of Israel, not the entire nation, would be saved. Right. And as a lead-in, by the way, to my discussion, I cite this book right here, Survivors in Israel. Now, this is a really, really big book. And what you and I, Mike, and preterists take for granted, the author of this book, Mark Adam Elliott, a very highly recognized and reputable scholar, he goes into the pre-Christian intertestamental literature to show that there was never a concept in Israel of a time when the majority of Israel would be saved. Never. It was always and invariably. And I mean, boy, he's got some discussions in here. For instance, in the last of the book, page 561 and following, the eschatological urgency in 4th Ezra. When you read his works here, all you have to do is point directly to Paul. It's amazing.
It's always the remnant. I mean, even in Enoch. I mean, just about every Dead Sea Scroll, it's always about the remnant.
Yeah. And so the point I'm making in this article, if you're going to try to argue, as Kenneth Gentry does, by the way, in his He Shall Have Dominion book, as Greg Bonson did before he passed away, that there's coming a time in which the majority of national Israel is going to turn to the Lord. Not every single person, but the bulk, the body, the corporate body of Israel. Well, if that's true, then Paul number one, he's violating everything that he said starting back in chapter 9. Number two, it's completely, totally out of step with all of the intertestamental literature, as Eliot demonstrates very, very powerfully. Now, I don't have a problem with the New Testament writers differing from the Dead Sea Scrolls. I don't have a problem with them differing from the intertestamental writings, the pseudepigraphal writings, because those writings were not inspired.
Right.
And we know that Jesus and his apostles differed from the Dead Sea community, from the pseudepigraphal writers in regard to the nature of fulfillment. We certainly see that.
Well, the Qumran community had this concept that they were the Adamic temple and that they were the spiritual temple of the last days.
That's very true.
So
That's very true.
they just didn't quite connect the dots, Don, I
Yeah.
think, between that spiritual temple, although there were some spiritual resurrection concepts as well. They just didn't have it all pieced together the way Jesus and the New Testament authors did.
Yeah, I think it was in my book, The Resurrection of Daniel, chapter 12, that I actually went into that there was kind of a strange admixture. There was no 100% consensus in the Dead Sea community about whether it's literal or whether it's spiritual, and they seem to hold both, or at least certain elements of them. So anyway, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, I just got about 5 or 6 different books, Collins and some other guys on the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's something I'm going to, because, they looked at Deuteronomy 32 and Daniel as the two key eschatological passages that formed their imminence. They believed that Christ had to come, the Messiah had to come during the Roman Empire, and specifically the generation that Jesus lived in was the terminal generation. So I figured I'm going to just dive big time into the Dead Sea Scrolls.
I need to dive into it more. I read snatches here and snatches there, and a little bit here and a little bit there. I'm certainly no expert on it. But let me go back to the point that I wanted to make, that I developed in this article, and that I think is absolutely critical for where we're going in our discussion. Anytime you see the doctrine of the salvation of the remnant, it is in a context of judgment, of God's righteous judgment on the nation.
Yes.
That would result in the destruction of the majority, the salvation of only a remnant. That has some real powerful connotations for Paul's doctrine of the salvation of the remnant, Romans chapter 9.
So we have a type and an antitype. That's why I kind of wanted to go back to Isaiah 10 for just a minute, because looking at Isaiah chapter 10, God is raising up Assyria to be his rod, his staff, to judge Old Covenant Israel, the 10 northern tribes. All right. And he says in the Septuagint, it's the same Greek word that Paul uses when he's quoting Isaiah 10, 22 and 23. And it can be translated quickly or without delay, no delay. Okay. As the ESV translates Romans 9:28.
Yeah.
So I was looking at that and I was going, wow, this is powerful. So what I was seeing is just a type and an antitype. In Isaiah's day, God is using Assyria to judge Israel, but he says, I'm going to save a remnant. Just like you said, judgment on the mass majority, the remnant is saved. Now, Paul is using that as an antitype to say, well, now God is going to bring Rome as the rod, and he's going to save a remnant, because God has always dealt with the remnant. He's always been faithful to Abraham's promise, even throughout the Old Testament, even in Isaiah's day, because he's always preserving the remnant, and that's what God is going to do now. But in these last days, he's going to save the remnant, not just in some physical deliverance from wrath. He's going to save them through the new covenant. Right. And take away their sin.
Amen. That's exactly right. And that imminence lies behind both texts. As your chart here says, within 8 years, the Lord brought Assyria on the 10 northern tribes, carried them away, physically saved that remnant, and like you said, typological. And now here is Paul writing, 57? somewhere along in there. And within 13 years, judgment comes on Israel. And so it's really interesting to me as we read and survey the commentators, how very often the commentators ignore the imminence of judgment in Romans 9.
Yeah.
And to return to the text, Romans 9:28, he says he will bring it to pass. Well, this is from sun telon. You got telos, which means perfection or goal or what have you. And it means to stack it up together, to bring it up, to heap it up, to bring it to its completion. And then sun timnon, it's almost a play, as I view it, and I'm not a Greek scholar by any stretch of the imagination, but you have sun telon and then sum or sun timnon. And it just sounds similar, but sun timnon means without any reservation. That's why a great number of translations, when you go to BibleGateway.com and you look up Romans chapter 9, verse 28 in all English translations, what you will see there without any doubt whatsoever is that Paul was affirming the imminent consummation of the process of the salvation of the remnant. Now, Mike, this is to me one of the most powerful commentators on chapter 11, verse 25 to 27. If it's true that God never, ever, ever promised to save the majority of Israel, but it's always a remnant, and if Paul is dealing with the salvation of the remnant, the process of it, the process that had already begun, he says in Romans chapter 11, verse 7, Israel has not attained that which she sought, but the elect has. Well, who are the elect? They're the remnant.
Exactly.
So the salvation of the remnant was already underway when Paul wrote. And so here is Paul affirming, again, chapter 9, verse 28, he will bring it to pass. He will finish the work, as the New King James says, and he will bring it to pass shortly. Some translations say he will finish the work without delay. Others say he will bring it to pass quickly. And that's the point I was making. If by going to BibleGateway.com, you look up all English translations, they don't hedge about this. They are all unanimous that Paul was affirming. And boy, many commentators really drive this home. They just miss the point of it. And they don't even seem to tie it to chapter 11, 25 to 27. So my point is, if Paul's doctrine of the salvation of Israel is focused on the remnant, as it is, and that salvation of the remnant, the process of the salvation of the remnant, was not going to be protracted. I like what Mark Nanos says, the mystery of God in Romans, and bless his heart. Mark Nanos really, boy, his book's a great book. But Mark Nanos believed Paul's prediction, Paul's eschatology failed. Yeah, just, but he sees the language. He sees the linguistics. And he says, Paul expected this to take place within no more than 20 years at the outside. Okay. I think he's absolutely correct. So here you have the affirmation, the salvation of the remnant would not be a long, drawn-out process. Chapter 11 is talking about the consummation of the process. Paul doesn't shift gears from chapter 9 to chapter 11 and say, oh, well, yeah, a remnant will be saved. Oh, you know what? I think maybe all Israel will be saved. I read one commentator, I've been trying to find out who it was, I read it years ago, and says that Paul started out talking about the remnant, but by the time he got to chapter 11, he changed his mind and said all of them.
Well, all of it, because he's going to, between 9 and 11, he's going to bring in the Gentiles. And so the Gentiles are now making up with the remnant all of Israel.
All the new covenant Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. But I think you see the point I'm making. Yeah. So, I mean, all of this ties together so wonderfully and beautifully when we understand that Paul, when he says a short work will the Lord make on the earth, lying behind that good news is the really, really bad news for Israel. Yeah. And that's overlooked.
Yeah. She was going to reach her final end, her last day's end.
Now,
And
I say that that's completely overlooked. Let me point this out. N.T. Wright, in his Paul and the Faithfulness of God, I think it's volume 3, I don't know. I can get the specific citation. When he says, blindness in part has happened unto Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, N.T. Wright says, much as we would like to believe that Paul is saying that the end of the blindness, Israel would be converted, that is not the history of the blindness motif. And boy, he does a great job of pointing out, anytime God accused Israel of blindness, which he did repeatedly, Isaiah chapter 6, 9 through 11, Isaiah 29, Isaiah 28 and 29. Anytime God accused Israel of blindness, Israel was in a whole lot of trouble. Judgment was coming. And that's powerful. And I developed that motif, by the way, in that book, Elijah Has Come, that you held up there a few moments ago. I have an extensive discussion of the blindness of Israel and what it meant prophetically for the nation of Israel, for the New Testament writers. It's fascinating to me. All 4 gospel writers quote from Isaiah chapter 6, 9 through 11. This people's heart has grown heavy. Their eyes they have closed. Their ears they have closed. Lest they see with their eyes, lest they hear with their ears. They understand with the heart and be converted, and I should heal them. Cry to this people. Cry out to this people, Isaiah was told. And Isaiah says, well, how long, O Lord? And the Lord says, until the cities lie desolate.
kind of like Jeremiah. It's just like that. You don't even pray for them. I have decreed, I have determined this is going to happen. And he determined it in Deuteronomy. He determined it through Jeremiah. He's determined it through Isaiah. It was a done deal. God was not going to continue with Old Covenant Israel, contrary to what your dispensational friends say. Dispensationalism has God dealing with the nations, and then Israel, and then the church and the nations are a parenthesis. But really, Israel is like the big thing from the beginning to the end of world history, where the biblical story is not that. Deuteronomy and Genesis, up to Genesis 10, God is dealing with the nations, Israel temporarily to be God's fishbowl so that the nations could look at Israel and see how Yahweh deals with everything. And then there would be an end to Israel, and then God would be dealing with the nations again. And they just have that so backwards.
Yeah. As I mentioned, this article that I'm working on is on the idea of replacement theology. When you look at the dispensational paradigm, and they like to talk about an emergency interim measure of the church, in reality, they have 2, and in truth, 3 interim measures, because they admit the law of Moses, the age of Moses and law was supposed to be removed to bring in the new covenant. Well, what was supposed to follow the age of Moses and the law, what was supposed to follow was the kingdom, the Davidic kingdom. Oops, that couldn't happen. So God established the church. That's the second interim measure.
Right.
Okay. So then, of course, they posit that at the second coming, Christ establishes finally the Davidic kingdom. But here's where it gets kind of dicey. What comes at the end of the 1,000 years? Dispensationalists don't even like to talk about this. But what comes at the end of the 1,000-year reign is the new heaven and the new earth. And that's radically disjunctive with the millennium. So when you break down dispensationalism into its actual details, they have 3 interim measures. The ultimate goal has to be the new heaven and new earth. Well, according to Isaiah 65, Isaiah 66, Zechariah 14, that new creation only comes at the time of the destruction of Old Covenant Israel.
Right.
Three interim measures before we reach the real goal.
Well, maybe there's even a fourth in there, because they say that the Mosaic law passed away, but they still say that Old Covenant Israel today has a special relationship with God. And I think guys like John Hagee see the problem with this and still have the Old Covenant somehow still in play, and that God has a relationship with Old Covenant Israel to the point where he says you don't have to even evangelize them.
That's right. John Hagee said
they're going to get saved. And I'm sitting there going, what? I mean, Jesus was a Jew. Paul was a Jew, and he preached the gospel to Jews. When the Old Covenant was actually present. It's just bizarre.
It really is strange. And I've said this many, many times, and I say with all due respect, I think there's some of the leaders in the dispensational world who are truly knowledgeable of the system. I think they know this, but they don't talk about it. But the average dispensationalist in the pew does not realize what we're talking about right here. Because if you ask, and I've done this, if you ask your average run-of-the-mill in the pew dispensationalist, will the law of Moses ever be restored? Well, no. Who would want to do that?
Right.
Oh, but wait a minute. You get into Ryrie, Walford, Ice, Pentecost. What happened? Oh, yeah, the law of Moses. Well, now, Dwight Pentecost hedged, and he said, well, it's not truly the law of Moses. It's something very similar to it.
Like I said, they don't know what to do with it.
They literally don't. And so you even have a division within the dispensational camp, because some of them, when they go to the Messianic temple in Ezekiel chapter 40 to 47, which clearly describes physical circumcision and animal sacrifices. Number one,
Levites too. Is that Jeremiah too? And
Levites. But they don't want to talk about circumcision at all. I mean, not even a little bit. That is like, don't make me talk about that. But they will talk about animal sacrifices. So one part of the dispensational camp says, oh, well, yeah, there will be animal sacrifices, but they will be memorial. They won't be for the atonement. Well, another part of the dispensational camp says, well, wait a minute, it actually says over and over and over again to make the atonement.
Yeah.
Using the identical Hebrew terminology as used in Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Numbers to speak of the sacrifices that really were to make the atonement. And so there's a humongous division within the dispensational camp that is extremely troublesome. And like I said, they don't want to talk about circumcision at all.
No, and that's what I always lead with. I always lead with that, because I want to see their eyes. Like, because Paul's so clear. If you teach that it's another gospel, it's cursed. And if that's the climax of redemptive history, is what Paul says is cursed, you gotta make a U-turn at that point. If that's not the clear red flag for you,
it's time to rethink.
Yeah.
Well, in my very first formal public debate, dispensational guy, his name is Don, Baptist minister in Shawnee, Oklahoma. And I mean, this is not, I started my preparation in late 1981. The debate was actually in 1983. And I discovered the power of the problem of circumcision. And a whole lot of my debate focused on the issue of circumcision. And, I made hand-drawn overhead charts, Mike. And I'm constantly reminded of the vision of Daniel chapter 2. Daniel interpreted the vision for Nebuchadnezzar, and he says, you saw a beast, and the form thereof was terrible. That describes my charts. They were hand-drawn, and the form thereof was terrible. I'm telling you what. But I was doing the very best that I could, because I would go and say, okay, this is what's true in your kingdom. If you're not circumcised, you don't go to Jerusalem. You don't go to worship. You can't offer sacrifices. And if you don't do that, you're cursed. But Paul says, those of you who are circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing.
Yeah.
And I had a whole list of charts on the dilemma of presented by circumcision. And this was related to me, Mike. Don worked at a newspaper office there in Shawnee. One of the elders from one of the congregations across town worked with him there. And he told me this. I have no reason to doubt him. But he said after about the third day it was a 4-day debate. After about the third day of the debate, Don walks in to the office and people were going, "Hey, Don, how's the debate going?" And he goes, "I'm getting my bleep, bleep, bleep whip. That's how it's going." Well, truth is, he was.
Right.
I might not express it quite as graphically as he did, but he admitted it. He did not have an answer for circumcision.
Right.
And that was the heart of my argumentation.
Yeah, you might as well camp on it. I mean, that is.
I did.
Yeah,
I did.
That and sacrifices. Well, so we've hit Romans 9 and we hit Isaiah 10. We've got some other Old Testament passages in here, don't we?
Yeah.
Let's see. Is it Isaiah 28 or is it Isaiah 1 that's next?
Let me see.
We did Hosea. Oh, I think it is. It is Isaiah 1.
Yeah, it is.
If the Lord of hosts had not left us offspring, we would have been like Sodom and we would have been like Gomorrah.
We've covered the remnant, I think, sufficiently.
Yeah.
There's always more we could say, but I think that's sufficient.
Okay. Well, and Isaiah 1, folks, is really powerful because it's connected to Isaiah 2, which is connected to Isaiah 3. In Isaiah 2 and 3, we have the concept of the nations coming to Zion, which Hebrews says is the church. We are Zion. We're the city of the living God. And so the nations are coming to Zion, I believe, for the wedding feast. And I think that's in Isaiah chapter 4 as well, the canopy there.
Yep.
But and when they're coming in the last days, there's going to be this great war that takes place. And Old Covenant Israel is going to fall by the sword. Jesus picks this up in Luke 23. And every commentator says when Jesus is quoting Isaiah 2, 10 and verse 19 or 20.
19 through 21, yeah.
Yeah, he says, when, blessed are when he's walking to the cross and he sees the women weeping, he says, don't weep for me, weep for yourselves, because there's coming a day when you're going to call for the rocks and run in the caves and hide from God's presence, which Isaiah says is the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Yep. It's the last day of the last days, which is the second coming of Christ. And that's what they're going to be fleeing from. So in Isaiah chapter 1, again, if Paul is quoting from Isaiah 1, you want to go to Isaiah 1, look at it, and look at the preceding chapters. So,
well, there's so much that could be brought out there, and like you said, it's tied into chapter 2 and 3. Isaiah chapters 2 through 4 is one united prophecy. There's no break whatsoever. You find that connective term in that day found all the way through chapter 2 into chapter 3 into chapter 4. And like I said, it is a grammatical connective that lets you know everything in these 3 chapters is connected to the last days period that would consummate, as you pointed out, in the last days, day of the Lord. Now, if that's not suggestive that when we come to the New Testament and we find both Jesus and the New Testament writers drawing directly from Isaiah chapters 2 through 4, directly from it, we're supposed to ignore those connections, and we're supposed to believe that although Isaiah, pardon me, let's see now. Isaiah chapter 2, Mike's already alluded to it. Men would run to the hills. They would hide in the caves. They would cry to the rocks, fall on us from the presence of the Lord. Well, in the first place, I always thought, Mike, it would be impossible to run from the day of the Lord.
Yeah, I mean, if it's the earth's going to burn up in a twinkling of an eye, I'm not sure where you're going to run to.
Yeah, would you have time? Honey, grab the kids, get in the car, run to the hills. No, that is not going to work. And John Robertson wrote on this years ago. He wrote a book in 1957 entitled The Coming of the Lord. And he was commenting on Luke chapter 17 and Matthew chapter 24. You know, if you're on the rooftops, do not come down, flee. And John Robinson, and then he drew in Isaiah chapter 2. And he said, the idea of an earth burning, time ending event that's over in a moment or twinkling of an eye hardly comports with the idea of fleeing over the rooftops. It just doesn't work. So here's another example of scholars who recognize that the idea of the day of the Lord as an earth burning, time ending event just is not based in Scripture. You have to divorce yourself from the Old Testament usage of the language in order to get that outcome, in order to get that interpretation. So you have this last days, day of the Lord. Well, what do we find? Okay, over here in 2 Peter chapter 3. Let's see, Peter is talking about, knowing this first, that in the last days scoffers shall come, saying, where's the promise of his coming? Okay. Then he talks about the day of the Lord. Even more, verse 10. The earth and the elements therein shall be burned up. Nevertheless, according to his promise, we look for a new heaven and new earth wherein dwells righteousness. So here is Peter talking about the last days, day of the Lord, that he says he is drawing from the Old Testament. I have challenged, I don't know how many people, I have challenged tons and tons and tons of folks who oppose covenant eschatology. Show me the Old Testament prophecy of the last days, day of the Lord, when the Lord would come to shake the earth mightily. Show that to me. Well, they won't try. Or they run Psalms 102, which we've discussed extensively. No need to go back there again. But when you go to Psalms, excuse me, when you go to Isaiah and you show them about this last day's day of the Lord as a time when men could run to the mountains, hide in the caves, that it cannot be an end of time event, they're totally lost. It's that proverbial deer in the headlight look. And all of a sudden, in fact, I had a formal public debate in New York some years ago, a couple of amillennial guys, and they were more historicists than they were anything. And I just did about a 45-minute designation or presentation on Isaiah 2 through 4. My opponent, the leading spokesman for the other side, he just got up, and I knew that he was sitting there looking literally stunned. And he got up, bless his heart, I appreciate his integrity. He got up and he said, I'm not familiar with that passage. I don't know how to answer that. Okay, good deal.
Right.
Appreciate the integrity. But here's the point. You cannot take Isaiah 2 through 4 and turn it into an end of time event. Because chapter 3 says, in that day, in what day? Oh, the day of the Lord. The day when men would run to the hills. There shall be a famine of both water and bread in Jerusalem. Oh, wow. Yeah. And verse 13, the Lord shall arise to judge his people. Oh, yeah. In the day in which 7 women will take hold of one man. Whoops.
Well, it's a classic it's a classic case of the commentators proving too much when they admit that Luke 23, when Jesus is referring to Isaiah 2, is AD 70, because the same passage is quoted by John in Revelation 6, which is the time of the vindication of the martyrs. In a very little while, that's when the wrath of the Lamb takes place. It's the same fulfillment of Isaiah 2 and 2 Thessalonians 2.
Chapter 1.
Oh, chapter 1. There you go, 5 through 10. And so, which the Lord would come to give the Thessalonians relief from their Jewish persecutors and give those same Jewish persecutors the same kind of trouble that they were giving to the Thessalonians. So everywhere you look where Isaiah 2 is in the New Testament, it's 80, 70 all over it. And yet that is the second coming event. Now, Isaiah 28 also can be proven that it's the second coming, but it's not an end of world history event as well. Let me go ahead and just read the lead up to that from his quote of Isaiah 1 to Isaiah 28. What shall we say then? That Gentiles who do not pursue righteousness have attained it? That is a righteousness that is by faith. But that Israel, who pursued a law that would lead to righteousness, did not succeed in reaching that law? Why? Because they did not pursue it by faith, but as it were based on works. They have stumbled over the stumbling stone, as it is written. And here's our text, Isaiah 28. Behold, I am laying in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. So, what's our hermeneutic? We go back to Isaiah 28. We look at the entire context. We look at the flow. We look at what is Paul's argument here? What does he want them to read in Isaiah, all of 28, and to bring back to his flow of thought? And boy, we've got the scoffers. You've brought up 2 Peter 3. Paul appeals to Isaiah 28 and 1 Corinthians 14, which my former pastor, John MacArthur, said, this is where tongues cease in 1 Corinthians 14, because he's quoting this passage here. And I'm like, come on, let's go. Let's take 80, 70 back.
Yeah, let's go.
One chapter before. But in this chapter, God is going to accomplish a strange work. Well, why would it be strange? Well, because the Jews thought that Messiah was going to come and destroy the Romans, when in fact, God was going to use the Romans to wipe them out and to save the righteous remnant that they were persecuting. They thought they were doing God a service, zeal without knowledge, just like Paul. He thought he was doing God's service by killing and imprisoning Christians. So it was going to be a complete strange work for these guys. Everything was going to be flipped on their head. But he also says something here, Don, about this coming of the Lord, and that it was going to be like when he came on Mount Perizim and Gibeon in the past to judge Israel, the Philistines. Well, when he did that, that wasn't an earth-burning coming of the Lord.
No, as a matter of fact, in both of those examples, what you have is God acting on the behalf of Israel to deliver Israel from her enemies, as you point out here, the Philistines. And you have on Mount Perizim, and then you have Gibeon in the past. Gibeon, the Lord using Gibeon to triumph over their enemies there in Judges chapter 6 and what have you.
And he was to come as he had come.
As he had come in the past. I will do a work, I will do a stranger. And that's why it's called strange.
Mm-hmm.
It was strange to the mind of Israel, because in those two examples, Mount Perizim and Gibeon, the Lord had come to redeem or to save them from their enemies. So, hey, they believed, boy, the Dead Sea Scroll community certainly believed that God was going to use them to whip the Romans, desolate them. Well, evidently none of them survived.
Yeah,
that didn't work out real well.
Only a few of them did. The Romans wiped the Essenes in the Qumran community out, and a small minority came into Jerusalem, which they didn't want to do,
right?
Because they lived in the desert. They wanted to separate themselves from those apostates.
Yes.
They were holding out for the last moment. They went into Jerusalem, they figured, and they knew Gog and Magog was going to be between Rome and apostate Jerusalem.
Yep.
But up to the very end, the few that survived that made it into Jerusalem, then they got wiped out when they got into Jerusalem. They thought the very end, somehow, some way, God is going to destroy the Romans, and he's going to destroy all these apostate Jews in Jerusalem, and he's going to deliver us, the children of light, because that's what Scripture teaches. I wish I could have heard the conversation, if there was one, when the Christians were leaving the city and they were going into the city, because in the Olivet Discourse he says, "Don't go into the city."
Yep.
And that's what the Essenes doing, that because they had nowhere else to go. The Romans just wiped them out.
Yeah.
And I just wish I wonder if they ever passed each other. Well, we're the children of light. No, we're the children of light. Well, you'll find out real fast.
Yeah. Guys, I wouldn't go in there if I were you.
Right.
There had to be some really, really, really strange interactions during that period of time, as you're pointing out here. We have a tendency not to personalize. We just look at it, as history. But those were real people living through some horrendous times. I mean, if you're a Jewish man wandering the Judean countryside, and if the Romans found you, guess what? You're going to die.
Yeah.
Chances are you're going to die. And so where are you going to go? Well, many of them did literally run to the hills, because that's the only place they felt like they could hide from the Romans. But in many instances, according to Josephus, the Romans found them there too.
They were hunted down, and some of them would swallow their gold and their silver. And once the Romans found that out, boy, they gutted them once they hunted them down.
That's exactly right.
It was a bad way to go.
It truly was horrific times. And I try to, as I express it, I try to humanize stories like that, try to understand what it was like to genuinely be alive. And, when Jesus says, "Pray that your flight is not in the winter." Well, some places wintertime is awfully brutal, and it can be that way in the land of Israel, from what I understand. And certainly when Jesus says, "Pray that you not be pregnant with child, or that you're not nursing." Can you imagine how difficult it would have been for a pregnant woman, or for a woman with a child that was nursing, to try to flee from the city during that horrific time?
How far was Pella? I forget. But I mean,
if I'm not mistaken, it was about somewhere between 50 and 75 miles. I may be wrong on that.
Okay. So it was beyond a Sabbath day journey, which was
absolutely
about a quarter of a mile in rabbinic law. That's another reason why he says, pray that it's not on the Sabbath, because the leaders would not let you out.
That's right. Those gates were closed on the Sabbath day, and it didn't matter if you wanted out or not. You were not getting out. You had to find some other way out. If you knew the way out through the tunnels, maybe you could do it, but otherwise you weren't getting out of that city.
Yeah.
Horrific times. So anyway, back to Isaiah chapter 3. Jesus used Isaiah chapter 3 again in Luke 21 and 24.
Yeah.
Here's Isaiah in chapter 3, I think it's verse 18, when he says, "Your men shall fall by the edge of the sword." Well, what's ironic here is in a text which the vast majority of commentators agree, this text is AD 70. In Luke chapter 21 and verse 24, Jesus is talking about your men, the men of Jerusalem, your men shall fall by the edge of the sword. So here we not only have Luke chapter 23, 28 to 31, directly drawing on Isaiah chapter 2, 19 to 21, but we have Jesus in Luke chapter 21 and verse 24 echoing Isaiah chapter 3 as well. And it's the time of war.
Yeah. And it was the times of the Gentile, the appointed times of the Gentiles, really.
Indeed.
Kairos, or the plural of Kairos there in verse 20.
So what we're seeing in Paul's references here in Romans chapter 9, as he draws on, well, to go back to Isaiah chapter 28. Yeah, guess what? Behold, you scoffers, and scoff. The Lord says, for I'm going to work a work in your day. And part of that scoffing, or part of that last days narrative that Isaiah chapter 28 mentions, is the Lord says, I'm going to kindle a fire, reflecting directly back on Deuteronomy chapter 32. I'm going to kindle a fire at that time. and it shall burn to the lowest depths. So here you have so much of 2 Peter chapter 3 right there in Isaiah chapter 28, 16 through the end of the chapter.
Yeah.
The Lord says, I'm going to annul your covenant with death. Is that in chapter 28 or is that chapter?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
It's the next verse 15.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol, we have an agreement when the overwhelming whip passes through.
It will not reach us. And I take that to mean, I don't know how you view this, but I take that to mean that the Lord was saying to the leaders of Israel that they believed that they were safe.
Yeah.
They believed that God was going to save them. If you'll remember the story in Josephus of how one false prophet gets up on the temple, gathers 8,000 people with him saying, the Lord's going to deliver us. The Lord's going to deliver us. Well, he didn't. 8,000 people died as a result of that particular debacle. But there were so many of the false prophets all around that area at that time who were convincing the people, God is going to protect us. We have a covenant with God. And God says, I'm sorry, guys. Got a new covenant. You have violated the old. The only covenant that I'm going to bring to bear for you is the covenant of wrath of Deuteronomy chapter 28 all the way through chapter 32.
So in the Old Testament, this passage would be applied in typology form when Israel, instead of repenting and listening to the prophets, they would trust in Egypt. They would trust in another country and make a covenant and think that they would be safe. And God said, no, that's not going to work. So the antitype would be the Jews not trusting in another military power, but trusting in the administration of death.
Correct.
The law, just like we read in Romans, you have to trust, you have to believe in Christ, not trust in the works of the law for your salvation. If you trust in the works of the law and you miss faith in Christ, then the administration of death is just, it's going to eat you up. There's not going to be any life for you.
That's right. That's right. I believe we're out of time, dude.
I think you're right. And we will pick it up again. I did want to get into a little bit of Isaiah 13, but maybe we won't need to do that. But all right, so we're guys, just to let you know, we are debating Sam Frost and Jeremiah Nortier, however you pronounce his last name. And looks like it's going to be, I haven't heard from the other two guys, but Don and I have pretty much settled on a 3-hour debate. I don't want to go longer than a 3-hour debate. I'm old and I don't, to me, it'd just be repetitious and I would probably just get very, very frustrated, to be honest with you. They went beyond 3 hours. So hopefully it looks like about 3 hours. We'll probably have about 20, 25 minutes each for openings. So should be a good time listening to them, trying to avoid time text and everything else. So,
oh yeah. And by the way, on August the 10th, I will be debating Gabriel, Tristan Gabriel, pardon me, who has boasted on numerous occasions he is going to destroy Don Preston. And I told him, I said, well, Tristan, I'm not bragging here, but I said, I've heard that kind of boast many, many times. Hadn't happened yet. So maybe he's got something new. Maybe he's got something I've never heard. I think I know exactly what he's going to say. We'll see. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, boy. Well, people have been asking for this debate for a while. I just never thought it was worth my time even looking at IO. I still kind of feel that way because it's such a silly position. But for whatever reason, some people actually get into it as an avenue just to leave Christianity altogether.
Well, I think in some instances, that's precisely what it is. By the way, our debate is the prophecies of the resurrection failed. There was no resurrection in AD 70.
Oh, so he's going to say the expectation was all physical, huh?
Yes, wow. Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. That's his position.
That's funny. So he's just taking all it is the liberal argument. All this is Bart Ehrman.
Oh yeah.
That's all. And Richard whatever his name was that you debated.
Carrier.
Yeah, Carrier. I mean, that's all
Yeah,
this is.
it's got to be literal. It's got to be physical. It's got to be optical. It's got to be auditory. What did they see? What did they hear? What did they feel? That's what it's all about.
Should be interesting to see what his take is on apocalyptic language in the Old Testament and some other things.
Yeah.
All right, brother.
Yeah. Oh, well, go. Okay, we're done.
All right, man. Take care.
Good night.